March 3rd, 1943, 06 Hosru hours. The Bismarck Sea lies calm beneath a bruised dawn sky, its waters tinted in hues of bronze and slate. To the men standing on the decks of the Imperial Japanese Navy convoy, the world feels suspended in a rare stillness, the kind of silence that precedes either glory or ruin. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura stands on the bridge of his flagship, the destroyer Shiratsuyu, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Ahead of him, 8 destroyers cut through the morning haze, their wakes trailing long white scars across the sea. Between them, steam 8 transport ships, heavy with soldiers and supplies, the lifeblood of the Empire's distant war. They are carrying the 51st Division, 900 men promised to General Hatazo Adachi at Leh, reinforcements, hope, and for Kimura pride. For more than a year, Japanese warships have sailed these waters unchallenged. The Imperial Navy has ruled the seas since Pearl Harbor and the Java Sea. To these men, the ocean feels like sacred groundwater, consecrated by victory. There is no reason to believe today will be any different. The wind carries faint laughter from the troop transports. Young soldiers, barely 20, sip green tea from battered cups. Some write hurried letters home, words that will never be delivered. Others kneel in quiet prayer, the soft murmur of Buddhist sutras, mixing with the mechanical rhythm of the engines. They have been told the voyage will be short 2 days to Leh, where their brothers wait, fighting to hold the line against American and Australian forces, creeping ever closer through the jungles of New Guinea. On paper, this convoy is impregnable. Each transport is shadowed by a destroyer bristling with guns. The fleet's anti-aircraft umbrella, the steel canopy as Japanese doctrine calls it, is formidable, over 125mm cannons, dozens of 13mm machine guns, and the 5-inch dual-purpose guns of the destroyers, all ready to repel any air attack. Each crew drills daily, practicing their choreography of survival, the turn, the fire, the reload, the evasive maneuver. To Kimura's officers, the idea that enemy aircraft could pierce this defense seems absurd. Captain Tamichihara of the destroyer Shigure peers through his binoculars, scanning the horizon. He has sailed this route between Rabaul and Leh many times. The Americans have tried to stop them before clumsy high-altitude raids by B-17 flying fortresses that rarely hit anything, torpedo planes that had to fly straight into gunfire, bombers that came too high, too slow. None had succeeded. The Imperial Navy, they believed, had perfected the art of surviving the skies. The sun climbs higher, glinting off the steel hulls. Lookouts call out bearings. The sea breathes slowly beneath them. To the officers, this is routine, another convoy in a long chain of victories. They trust in their training, their discipline, and in the spiritual armor of the Yamato spirit, that fierce, unyielding belief that courage alone can shape destiny. Yet, beneath that calm, there is unease. Kimura knows the Americans are watching. They always are. Somewhere beyond the horizon, reconnaissance planes lurk, their cameras capturing every movement. But intelligence reports have said nothing of new tactics, no sign of a threat beyond what they've already faced. The Admiral exhales slowly, eyes narrowed against the morning glare. They will come, he thinks. They always come. And we will drive them away, as we have before. Aboard the transport, Kanbaryu Maru, a corporal from Osaka, ties a white cloth around his head. The cloth bears 3 characters in red ink, certain victory. He folds his letter home into his pocket, where it will remain until the sea swallows it. He looks out across the waves, imagining the green coastline of New Guinea. The sky is cloudless, the air sweet with salt. He cannot know that by noon the ocean will burn. The convoy steams onward in perfect formation, destroyers on the flanks, transports in the center, a disciplined ballet of steel and purpose. Signal flags snap in the wind, and the officers note the time, adjusting their compasses. Each man performs his duty as he has hundreds of times before. There is comfort in repetition, in the illusion of control. But nature has its own premonitions. The seabirds that usually follow the convoy have vanished. The horizon seems unnaturally bright, as if reflecting something hidden beyond sight. At 0800 hours, the lookout aboard the destroyer Asashio spots dark specks far to the south, tiny shadows moving against the light. Multiple contacts bearing 240 degrees, the lookout shouts. Altitude, medium. Lieutenant Commander Ikata steadies his binoculars. American bombers, B-17s perhaps, or B-25s approaching at around 7,000 feet. A standard formation. Nothing unusual. He orders the anti-aircraft crews to stand by. The gunners swing their barrels upward, tracing invisible arcs into the sky, ready to unleash the familiar storm of steel. Kimura is calm. This he knows. This they can handle. The convoy holds course. Destroyers accelerate to flank speed, their wakes converging like brushstrokes of white paint on blue canvas. The sky begins to hum with the distant growl of engines. Officers shout orders. Sailors load belts of ammunition. The air smells of oil and ozone. No one notices the faint shadows slipping in below the glare, closer to the sea, faster and visible against the sunlit waves. They are still miles away, hugging the surface of the ocean like predators waiting to strike. The clock ticks toward 9. The Imperial Navy stands ready, confident that its steel umbrella will once again turn back the storm. None of them, not Kimura, not his captains, not the 600-900 men on those transports, can imagine that they are already sailing into history. Within 4 hours, the calm surface of the Bismarck Sea will become a graveyard of fire and twisted metal. For now, though, the sea is silent, and the Empire still believes it owns the morning. Before we continue to the next part where the skies over the Bismarck Sea will erupt in smoke and fire, I want to take a brief moment to listen to you. If you're watching this video, please leave a comment below. Tell us your name, where you're from, and if you'd like, why you love World War II history. We're not just retelling history, we're keeping the memory of the past alive together. Every comment you share is a reminder that no matter how much time passes, the stories of courage and human tragedy still echo through the years. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Now, take a deep breath, because the next part will take us straight into the storm of steel over the Bismarck Sea. Far from the Bismarck Sea, in the humid, red-dusted airfields of northern Australia, another kind of battle is being fought. Not one of ships and guns, but of wrenches, welding torches, and restless minds. Here in makeshift hangars outside Brisbane, the sound of hammers and the smell of machine oil mingle with the war's pulse. This is where a handful of American mechanics, led by a man named Pappy Gunn, are quietly rewriting the rules of aerial warfare. Pappy Gunn is not a typical officer. He's a wiry, sunburned former Navy pilot with a grin that hides both genius and defiance. He distrusts bureaucracy and believes the best ideas come from the field, not from the polished desks of generals. When he arrived in Australia in 1942, he saw a problem that everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. American bombers could not hit moving ships. High-altitude bombing, even by skilled crews, was nearly useless against maneuvering targets. The vast Pacific was littered with craters where bombs had missed their mark by hundreds of yards. Torpedo planes demanded long, straight approaches and were slaughtered before they could strike. Something had to change, and Gunn decided to change it himself. He started with the B-25 Mitchell, a sturdy medium bomber with a reputation for reliability, but no special talent for naval attack. Working alongside Jack Fox, a representative from North American Aviation, Gunn stripped out the bombardier's station in the nose and began installing 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 at first, then 6, then finally 8. The result looked monstrous, 8 black barrels jutting forward like the fangs of some mechanical beast. The mechanics at Eagle Farm Airfield worked around the clock, often scavenging spare parts from wrecks. The smell of burning metal filled the hangars as sparks flew into the night. One airman later recalled that Gunn could make an airplane do anything but talk. When told by higher-ups that such modifications were dangerous and unauthorized, Gunn shrugged and said, "If it kills more Japs, it's authorized." Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute, unleashing a torrent of armor-piercing incendiary bullets that could slice through steel decks like a saw through wood. 8 guns firing together meant nearly 7,000 rounds per minute, a hurricane of metal that turned the front of the plane into a flying buzzsaw. It wasn't elegant, but it was devastatingly effective. What Gunn didn't realize at first was that his work would spark one of the greatest tactical revolutions of the Pacific War. Meanwhile, another innovator, Major William Benn, of the 43rd Bombardment Group, was experimenting with something equally daring: skip bombing. He had discovered that a bomb dropped from just 200 feet could skip across the water like a stone before slamming into the side of a ship. It required nerves of steel flying low, straight and level into a wall of anti-aircraft fire, but the results were astonishing. When General George C. Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, saw the potential of combining Benn's skip bombing with Gunn's gunship conversions, he understood immediately this was the key to breaking Japan's grip on the sea. He called these new aircraft commerce destroyers. Training began in secret. Pilots practiced their runs against the rusting hulk of the SS Pruth, a wreck off the coast near Port Moresby. Day after day, they came in at treetop height, learning to gauge distance by instinct, the roar of engines blending with the sea spray that lashed their windshields. They measured their courage, not in medals, but in how close they could fly without hitting the waves. From above, the Pacific shimmered gold under the Australian sun. From below, it seemed as if the ocean itself had begun to grow teeth. The modified B-25s were temperamental, their noses, heavy recoil, fierce enough to shake the entire airframe. But the men loved them. "She kicks like a mule," one pilot joked, "but she bites like a tiger." Each aircraft was given a name: Ruthless Sleepy Time, Gal Hell's Angel. They painted snarling shark mouths on the nose, a symbol of the new kind of warfare taking shape, fast, brutal, and personal. To the Japanese, air warfare was still an elegant duel between disciplined gunners and high-altitude bombers. But to the Americans, sweating on those Australian airstrips, war was no longer about elegance. It was about invention. Improvisation became their doctrine. If something worked, they used it. If it didn't, they rebuilt it overnight. By early 1943, Gunn's Frankenstein creation had evolved into a fleet of deadly strafer B-25s. The pilots of the 3rd Attack Group were eager to prove what these new machines could do. They trained to fly low, lower than anyone dared, barely 20 feet above the ocean, so close that the propeller wash whipped up trails of white foam. The men of the Japanese convoy would never see them coming. For now, the planes waited on the Australian coast, sunlight glinting off their gun barrels as ground crews loaded ammunition belts. The Pacific stretched endlessly before them, blue quiet, and soon to be broken by the roar of engines. History was about to turn on a few men with wrenches, and an idea, a reminder, that in war sometimes the spark of a mechanic can burn brighter than the grandest of admirals. Dawn breaks again over the Bismarck Sea. The Japanese convoy steams steadily westward, its black hulls cutting through a restless blue. To Admiral Kimura, everything appears as it should, disciplined, predictable, safe. The men eat their rice rations, the destroyers maintain their elegant escort pattern, and the air smells of salt oil and confidence. But somewhere to the south, beyond the shimmering horizon, the sky hums with engines. Invisible to Japanese lookouts, a new kind of storm is gathering. At 0900 hours, the lookout aboard the destroyer Asashio spots movement, dark silhouettes at altitude. Enemy aircraft bearing 240 medium height. The report travels swiftly through the convoy. Kimura lifts his binoculars, a formation of B-17s and B-25s, glinting silver in the sun. Standard American bombers. Nothing they haven't seen before. All ships prepare for anti-aircraft fire, Kimura orders calmly. The gunners take their stations, hands poised on triggers, eyes trained on the sky. The ships tighten formation, a shield of steel and discipline. The Japanese officers whisper a quiet satisfaction: the Americans are coming, and the convoy is ready. The first wave of B-17 flying fortresses drones overhead at 7,000 feet. Their bomb bays open, releasing their payloads. The sky blossoms with black dots that tumble lazily downward. "Brace for impact," shouts a voice on Shigura's deck. Explosions erupt in towering geysers far behind the ships, impressive, but harmless. The gunners laugh, firing bursts of 25mm flak into the sky, tracing patterns of fire that chase the bombers away. It feels routine, familiar, almost easy. And then, the sea roars. At first, it seems like the growl of distant thunder, but it grows louder, a vibration deep enough to rattle teeth and stir the gut. The sound doesn't come from above. It comes from below the horizon. One lookout squinting southward sees it first, a glint of metal skimming the waves. Then another. Then dozens. The air shimmers, and suddenly, the sea itself seems to rise up, pierced by streaks of silver, coming in so low their propeller wash kicks up curtains of spray. Aircraft, low altitude. South-southwest, someone screams. The officers whirl in disbelief. No one in the Imperial Navy has ever seen an attack like this. 13 Australian Beaufighters and 12 American B-25 strafers burst from the haze at wave-top height engines, screaming gun barrels, already blazing. From a distance, they look like angry hornets. But as they close, the gunners can see the black holes in their noses, 8 of them spitting fire. Major Edward L. Ed Larner, in his B-25 Ruthless, leads the attack. Through his windshield, the Japanese destroyer Shirayuki looms larger with every heartbeat. He can see sailors on deck, pointing upward, confused, their guns still aimed at the high-flying B-17s. Larner steadies his hand on the control yoke. Ruthless on target, he mutters into the intercom. His co-pilot nods silently. The altimeter reads 50 feet. The sea races by in a blur of blue and foam. At 200 yards, Larner squeezes the trigger. The nose of Ruthless erupts in flame. 8 streams of tracer fire leap forward in perfect unison, a molten bridge of red and white light stretching from aircraft to ship. The sound is deafening, a rolling thunder that drowns out the engine roar. The 50 caliber rounds tear into Shirayuki's bridge and superstructure at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Glass explodes. Gun shields buckle. Men vanish in clouds of sparks and shrapnel. The destroyer's forward guns fall silent in seconds. Ensign Takashi Mieta, one of the few survivors on the bridge, later described the scene as like being trapped inside a giant metal saw. He remembered seeing his captain decapitated by a burst that sliced through the bridge windows, the air filled with smoke and screams. Larner keeps firing 8 seconds of hell, pouring nearly 1,000 rounds into the ship, before releasing 2 500-pound bombs. They skip across the surface like stones, slamming into Shirayuki's hull just below the waterline. 5 seconds later, they detonate, splitting the destroyer's spine. A wall of flame and seawater erupts into the air. Target destroyed, Larner calls, pulling up as the shockwave rocks his aircraft. Below him, Shirayuki begins to roll to port her decks, burning her crew, fighting a losing battle against the sea. Behind Ruthless, the sky becomes a living inferno. Other B-25s dive in at full throttle, choosing their targets, transports. Loaded with soldiers, destroyers. Maneuvering desperately, gunners, firing wildly into empty sky. Lieutenant John Hennebrey lines up on the transport Kaikusi Maru. His tracers walk across the ship's deck, shattering cranes, and tearing through the bridge before his bombs skip in and strike home. The explosion engulfs the forward section, sending men and debris tumbling into the sea. On another approach, Australian Flight Sergeant Fred Cassidy, flying a Beaufighter, dives on Tio Maru. He fires his 4 20mm cannons, watching the rounds explode across the superstructure. The ship's bridge disintegrates under the impact. Lifeboats shatter into splinters, and the air fills with black smoke. For the Japanese sailors, there is no defense. Their training, their proud umbrella of steel, means nothing against this onslaught. The guns that once guarded the sky can't be lowered fast enough to track enemies, skimming the waves. Crews are cut down before they can even turn their turrets. Admiral Kimura watches from his flagship in disbelief. His formation is collapsing. Ships are aflame, their wakes twisted into chaotic white spirals. The radio crackles with desperate voices. We are hit. Fire. In engine room, requesting support. But there is no support left to give. The sky moments ago, bright and serene, is now a churning canvas of smoke and fire. The Americans have unleashed something entirely new. A machine gun hurricane, a doctrine born, not in an admiral's office, but in a mechanic's workshop. From above, it looks like a storm, a violent ballet of courage and destruction. The Japanese sailors fight back with everything they have, but the ocean has turned against them. The Empire's steel wall is cracking one ship at a time. And this is only the beginning. The Bismarck Sea erupts into chaos. In the span of a heartbeat, order collapses into carnage. The convoy that had glided so proudly across the water only moments ago is now a burning maze of smoke, fire, and panic. The sky is alive, roaring, flashing, screaming. B-25 strafers and Australian bowfighters dive strafe and climb in deadly rhythm. Every few seconds, the sea shudders with new explosions as skip bombs detonate beneath the surface. The Japanese fleet, once disciplined and precise, now twists and flails like a wounded animal. Major Ed Larner, banking ruthless, hard to starboard, looks down at the scene unfolding below. God help them, he mutters, though his finger remains steady on the trigger. His gunners spray the decks of another destroyer with fire, each burst cutting through men and steel alike. The air is thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning oil. The pilot's goggles are smeared with salt and soot, yet they press on, flying so low that the spray from their own wake spatters their windshields. On the destroyer, Tokatsukaze Commander Yasumi Doi fights to regain control. His gunners, trained to track high-altitude bombers, now face enemies so close that their firing arcs are useless. He shouts orders over the thunder of guns: aim low, track them at the surface. But his voice is lost in the roar. Within seconds, the gun crews are torn apart by 50 caliber fire. Doi looks up just in time to see the gleaming nose of a B-25 flash past his bridge guns, blazing like the eyes of a demon. The bullets rip through his command post. Steel walls blossom with sparks. He falls to the deck, his uniform shredded, his ship screaming around him. Across the convoy, destruction multiplies. The transport Nojima Maru takes 3 skip bomb hits in rapid succession. The explosions peel open her hull like the lid of a tin can. Hundreds of soldiers packed into cargo holds wearing full field gear are trapped as seawater floods in. There is no time to escape. Survivors on nearby ships later swear they could hear the muffled pounding of fists from inside the hull before the ship vanishes beneath the waves. Nearby, the destroyer Arashio makes a desperate move. Her captain orders full speed ahead, steering between the transports in an attempt to shield them with his own ship. It is an act of courage and suicide. 3 B-25s pivot toward her, their combined 24 machine guns forming a single storm of lead. In less than 10 seconds, Arashio's superstructure is shredded. The bridge disintegrates. Her fire control tower collapses into twisted metal. Still moving at full throttle, she collides with the transport Nojima, the 2 ships locking together in a burning embrace as ammunition cooks off in violent bursts. The ocean turns black with oil and red with blood. Lieutenant Donald McCullough, piloting Sleepy Time. Gal spots the transport Oigawa Maru turning broadside. It's a fatal mistake. That's it, he growls into his mic. She's ours. He lines up his sights at 500 yards and opens fire. The 8 machine guns spit out nearly 100 rounds per second, stitching a path of destruction across the ship's side. The rounds punch through the hull, igniting fuel drums and ammunition crates. Flames burst from the cargo holds. McCullough drops his bombs. They skip twice, strike the hull and detonate with a hollow, thunderous crack. The ship splits cleanly in 2. Within minutes, she's gone, leaving only burning debris and the screams of drowning men. For the Japanese sailors, this attack is beyond comprehension. Their doctrine, their faith in maneuver and anti-aircraft precision, has been rendered meaningless. These bombers are not attacking from predictable heights or angles. They come in low, almost skimming the waves, too fast for traditional gunnery, too brutal to counter. Admiral Kimura stands on the bridge of his flagship Shiratsuyu, staring at the devastation. His hands tremble, not from fear, but disbelief. The sea, the domain Japan had ruled so confidently, has turned against him. He shouts for evasive maneuvers, but his voice is drowned in chaos. One destroyer after another is hit. The air is thick with the shriek of shells and the booming concussion of bombs. The bowfighters make another pass their 20mm cannons, chewing through lifeboats and anti-aircraft nests. The pilots fly so low that their propeller wash ripples across the surface of the sea. They are relentless, their attacks synchronized with the B-25s that follow behind, pouring bullets into anything that moves. In the midst of it all, a lone Japanese ensign clings to the rail of a burning transport. His uniform is soaked in blood and seawater. Around him, the deck tilts at a sickening angle, flames consuming everything. Through the smoke, he glimpses a B-25 streaking overhead sunlight, flashing off its wings. He can see the nose-8 black mouths of death, and for an instant, he feels something strange awe. Then the guns light up, and the world disappears in fire. The entire attack lasts barely 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and the convoy is gone. Ships sink in every direction, their burning hulls marking the sea like floating funeral pyres. The air is filled with the cries of wounded men and the crackle of flames. The once ordered formation is now a graveyard of twisted steel. At 10:15 a.m., the last B-25s pull away their engines, fading into the southern horizon. The pilots glance back and see only columns of black smoke rising thousands of feet into the sky. One airman whispers into his headset, "It's over." But for the men below, it is anything but over. Admiral Kimura, standing on the bridge of his crippled ship, looks upon the wreckage of his command. His eyes, usually sharp and unwavering, now carry the distant emptiness of a man who has seen the impossible. 8 transports gone, 4 destroyers sinking, thousands of soldiers lost before ever touching land. He does not yet realize that this battle, this 15-minute slaughter, has changed the course of the Pacific War. The sea, once the Empire's shield, has become its grave. By noon, the Bismarck Sea has fallen silent again. The waves, still dark with oil and ash, roll gently over what was once a fleet. Only minutes ago, the horizon burned with pillars of fire. Now it is a drifting cemetery. Pieces of wood helmets and twisted steel float among the bodies of men who just this morning had believed themselves invincible. Admiral Masatomi Kimura stands motionless on the bridge of his damaged flagship, his uniform stained with smoke and seawater. Around him, the crew moves in hushed confusion. Orders have become meaningless. The radios hiss with static fragments of dying voices, distress calls that fade into silence. Every ship that can still move is turning north, limping away from the nightmare. The rest are gone, swallowed by the sea. The smell is unforgettable. Burning oil cordite and salt mix into a stench that clings to the skin. The ocean itself seems to grieve. Flames still flicker on the surface, spreading across the slick of fuel, like ghostly lanterns drifting in the wind. Aboard the destroyer, Asagumo rescue operations begin, but there is little to rescue. The deck is slick with blood and the crew drags half-burned men from the water soldiers, sailors, officers, all indistinguishable now. Most are silent. A few whisper prayers. One survivor, shaking uncontrollably, clutches a wooden board and repeats, "Why didn't the gods protect us?" Of the 6,900 soldiers who had sailed from Rabaul, fewer than 1/200 will ever reach Leh. Most of them rescued hours later by submarines that slip in under the cover of darkness. The rest vanish with the ships that carried them entombed in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea. Captain Tamichihara, one of the few senior officers to survive later, writes in his journal, "It was like nothing we had ever imagined possible. The Americans seemed to saw our ships in half with their guns. Our doctrine, our training, our courage, all were useless. We were helpless like children beneath a falling mountain. The scale of the loss stuns even the Japanese high command." When the report reaches Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, he reads it in silence. Witnesses recall that he set the paper down slowly and stared out the window for a long time before speaking. So, the sea itself is no longer ours. For Yamamoto, the man who had orchestrated the triumph at Pearl Harbor, this is more than a tactical defeat. It is an omen. Japan's naval dominance built over decades of victories has been shattered in a single morning. The Bismarck Sea has exposed a terrifying truth. The empire can no longer move its armies safely across the Pacific. Strategically, the consequences are catastrophic. The Japanese garrisons in New Guinea, already starving and isolated, will never again receive full reinforcement. The planned defense of Leh collapses. Supplies of ammunition, food, and medicine dwindle to nothing. Men begin to die not in battle, but in the jungle of hunger, malaria, and despair. From this point onward, the Imperial Navy is forced into a defensive posture. Surface convoys are abandoned. The mighty ships that once patrolled the Pacific are reduced to cautious night runs, using darkness as their only shield. The Tokyo Express, once a symbol of Japan's daring speed, now becomes an act of desperation. Yamamoto orders a review of naval tactics, anti-aircraft training, convoy routes, and radar deployment. But deep down, he knows the truth. There is no doctrine that can save them from this new weapon. For the first time in centuries, Japan's warriors must confront an enemy that cannot be met blade to blade. The B-25 strafer has rewritten the laws of combat, turning the open sea, once the empire's strength, into its deadliest weakness. In Tokyo, the reaction is disbelief mixed with shame. Newspapers report the loss of several ships, but hide the magnitude of the disaster. Families of the 51st Division wait for news that never comes. In letters smuggled home from survivors, a few words reveal the horror. The sea was fire, the sky full of death. Far away in Allied headquarters at Port Moresby, General George Kenney studies reconnaissance photos showing the wreckage strewn across the Bismarck Sea. He circles the black shapes with a pencil: 8 transports, 4 destroyers gone. He says quietly, "That's it. Japan's highway to New Guinea is closed." His officers nod, understanding that this victory, more than any other, marks a turning point. For the Allied pilots who flew that day, the jubilation is tempered by exhaustion. Many land with bullet holes in their wings and blood on their flight suits. Some vomit from adrenaline, others stare silently at the sea still burning behind them. They know what they have done and what it means. For the Japanese sailors who survived the trauma, never fades. Years later, they still dream of that morning, the roar of engines skimming the waves, the glitter of sunlight on metal, the faces of comrades vanishing in smoke. The ocean, once their protector, became their executioner. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea is over, but its echoes ripple outward through the Pacific. It is not just the loss of ships and men that breaks the empire. It is the loss of faith. The myth of invincibility, built since Tsushima in 1905, has been shattered. For the first time, Japanese officers whisper what was once unthinkable, that perhaps the war cannot be won. In the stillness of the afternoon, as the fires fade and the waves reclaim the wrecks, Admiral Kimura remains on his bridge. He stares at the horizon, not toward the enemy, but toward the east, where Japan lies, far beyond the curve of the world. The wind carries the faint scent of burning steel. He removes his cap and closes his eyes. The empire he serves is still vast, still proud, but something fundamental has died in the waters below him. The sea that once carried Japan's power now carries its ghosts. In the wake of the Bismarck Sea, a quiet revolution spreads through the Allied airfields of the Southwest Pacific. Mechanics who once patched bullet holes now work with a new sense of purpose. Commanders who once doubted field experiments now demand more of them. The success of the B-25 strafer has rewritten the very language of air combat, and every pilot, gunner, and engineer knows they are part of something extraordinary. The Americans waste no time turning victory into doctrine. By mid-1943, entire squadrons are being refitted with the strafer configuration. The 3rd Attack Group veterans of the Bismarck assault becomes the template. Their success convinces General George Kenney that air power in the Pacific must be low, fast, and ruthless. The B-25, once a medium bomber, is reborn as a predator. From dusty airstrips in New Guinea to jungle clearings in the Solomons, the sound of drills and rivet guns fills the air. Crews modify standard B-25Cs and Ds into custom-built gunships, following Gunn's original blueprints. The nose sections bristle with 850 caliber Brownings. 4 more are mounted on the sides of the fuselage, 2 in the top turret, and another pair in the tail. Each aircraft becomes a flying fortress, in miniature, not elegant, but terrifyingly effective. The 345th Bombardment Group, soon to be nicknamed the Air Apaches, is among the first to receive the new machines. Their aircraft bear names that blend menace and humor. Dirty Dora Pluto, Havoc Hell's Angel. Mechanics paint gaping shark mouths around the noses part. Intimidation, part morale booster. When these planes lift off at dawn, sunlight flashes off the polished barrels like the teeth of a beast. They hunt Japanese shipping relentlessly. From the Arafura Sea to the Bismarck Archipelago, convoys that once sailed unchallenged now burn within hours. The B-25s attack in coordinated waves, bowfighters striking first to silence gun crews, then strafers sweeping in low to finish the kill with streams of incendiary fire. Japanese sailors begin calling them Hachime no Mi, the eight-eyed monsters. Reports filter back to Rabaul in Tokyo, describing ships destroyed in seconds, aircraft strafed on the ground, harbors turned into infernos. One officer writes bitterly, "They come so low the sea bends around them, and their guns are louder than the thunder of heaven." By late 1943, the Japanese Navy admits the unthinkable daylight movement of any convoy within 500 miles of Allied airfields is suicidal. Japan's empire, spread across thousands of islands, begins to starve. With supply lines cut, garrisons shrink and fade, their men dying not from combat, but from hunger and disease. The Americans, for their part, perfect their art. Pilots learn to fly barely above the treetops, using the terrain itself as cover. They refine skip bombing with precision, releasing at 60 feet, approaching at an angle that makes the bombs bounce twice before striking. The fuses are timed by experience: 4 seconds for transports, 6 for destroyers. The Australian squadrons, flying side by side with the Americans, add their own grit and ingenuity. No. 18 Squadron, RAAF, composed largely of Dutch and Australian crews, paints their B-25s with roundels of the RAF, but flies them like wolves. Their local knowledge of island reefs and coastal currents allows them to find Japanese barges hiding in narrow inlets. Pilots return from missions with salt crusted on their faces, laughing with exhaustion, their aircraft scarred but alive. Each new mission pushes the limits of what these planes can do. Some B-25s return with holes large enough to see daylight through the fuselage. Mechanics work miracles welding, hammering, rebalancing engines to get them flying again by morning. Sleep is for Tokyo, one crew chief jokes. The air smells perpetually of oil and cordite. The legend of the strafer spreads through the Pacific like wildfire. To the ground, troops pinned down on jungle fronts, the low, snarling roar of a B-25's engines becomes the sound of salvation. Soldiers pause in foxholes just to watch them streak overhead, their guns spitting light. The buzzsaws, they call them, are angels with machine guns. But there is more than efficiency in these flying gunships. There is personality. The men who fly them form a distinct breed, audacious, inventive, and fiercely proud. They decorate their planes with pin-up art names of hometown sweethearts or crude jokes. Before takeoff, crews perform rituals, a hand on the fuselage for luck, a muttered prayer, a cigarette shared in silence. They know the odds. Low-level missions mean flying straight into enemy fire, often without fighter escort. A single hit can send a plane cartwheeling into the sea. Yet they go anyway because, as one pilot puts it, when we fly low, we don't just hit the enemy. We scare him to death. The Japanese adapt as best they can. They mount more anti-aircraft guns, train gunners to aim lower, and even order fighters to ram the approaching B-25s when out of ammunition. It changes little. The strafers are too fast, too coordinated, too relentless. The ocean becomes their hunting ground, and every ship that dares to move becomes prey. By early 1944, the results are undeniable. Japan's merchant fleet has lost more than 60% of its tonnage. Entire supply networks collapse. The empire's conquest, once fed by endless convoys, begin to wither in isolation. In the steaming jungles of New Guinea, Japanese soldiers carve hunger marks into trees, waiting for supply ships that will never come. The Allies don't yet realize it, but the victory at the Bismarck Sea has done more than win a battle. It has changed the rhythm of the entire war. Every innovation, every improvised modification, every sleepless night in a workshop has paid off. What began as a mechanics experiment in a dusty Australian hangar has evolved into a doctrine that dominates the Pacific. In the hands of these pilots, the B-25 strafer is no longer just an aircraft. It is a symbol of ingenuity over tradition, of adaptation over arrogance, and of the idea that the smallest spark of innovation can ignite an empire's downfall. And as 1944 dawns, that spark has become a fire that will burn from the Bismarck Sea all the way to Tokyo Bay. As 1944 turns to 1945, the once experimental B-25 strafer has become an icon of Allied air power, a weapon both feared and admired. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Empire is shrinking its supply lines, cut to ribbons, its convoys sunk faster than they can sail. The thunder of the strafer's 8 guns has become the soundtrack of Japan's unraveling. But the story of these aircraft is more than a tale of destruction. It is a story of transformation. From a handful of modified bombers in a dusty Australian workshop to fleets of specialized gunships sweeping the Pacific, the B-25 has evolved into something revolutionary, a flying arsenal born of necessity, tempered by ingenuity. By mid-1944, American and Australian crews wield the B-25 like a scalpel of war. They attack not only ships, but airfields, fuel depots, and radar installations. The August raids on Wewak demonstrate their terrifying precision strafers, tearing across the airfield at treetop height, their guns raking parked aircraft hangars and trucks. In less than 10 minutes, over 170 Japanese planes are destroyed on the ground. Survivors describe it as if the sky itself was on fire. Even the Imperial Japanese Navy, once proud masters of the sea, can barely leave port. When their ships do move, it is only under cover of darkness, and even then, the fear persists. Pilots begin to refer to the B-25 as the hammer of daylight. By now, the Americans have refined their design to near perfection. The B-25 J-22, the ultimate strafer variant, carries 8 nose guns, 4 side-mounted package guns, 2 in the turret, and 2 more in the waist, a staggering total of 18 50-caliber machine guns. When all are fired together, they unleash a storm of metal unmatched by any other aircraft of the war. The plane itself shudders from the recoil, its engines roaring like a beast straining against its own power. The Japanese try to respond in kind. Engineers mount additional anti-aircraft guns on transports and experiment with radar-guided targeting. But nothing can counter the simple, brutal truth: the B-25 hits first, faster, and harder. One Japanese report admits bitterly, the enemy aircraft are no longer bombers, but flying guns. They sweep our decks clean before we can even see them. German and Italian observers reading intelligence reports about these gunships are astonished. The Luftwaffe experiments with forward-firing cannons on their Ju-88s, but the weight and recoil make them clumsy. The Italians try skip bombing with SM-79s, but without the B-25's firepower, their attacks are suicide runs. No other nation manages to replicate the perfect balance of speed, endurance, and sheer firepower that defines the strafer. In the humid airfields of New Guinea, maintenance crews work around the clock to keep the gunships flying. Salt eats at the barrels, sand clogs the turrets, and the humidity turns every screw into a rusted challenge. Yet every dawn they roll the planes out again, patched, loaded, and ready. A mechanic once said, "We built death with our hands, but it saved lives." The cost, however, is heavy. The 3rd Attack Group, alone, loses over 40 aircraft to enemy fire. Many of those planes vanish at sea, their crews never found. Low-altitude attacks are unforgiving. A single spark and the ocean becomes a tomb. Veterans later speak of the strain, the trembling hands after a mission, the ringing in their ears, the haunted silence when they land and count which planes didn't return. Yet they keep flying. Because every mission means fewer Japanese ships on the horizon, fewer reinforcements for enemy troops, and one step closer to ending the war. When the end finally comes in August 1945, the B-25 is still flying combat missions. On the very day of Japan's surrender, August 14th, B-25s of the 345th Bombardment Group attack Japanese ships in the inland sea. They don't yet know the war is over. Their bullets tear through the last remnants of an empire already defeated. By the time they return to base, peace has been declared. The men climb out of their planes too tired to cheer, too changed to celebrate. In the years that follow, the legacy of the strafer only grows. Military tacticians study it as a case study in battlefield innovation. Its design inspires future gunships, the AC-47 Spooky, the AC-130 Spectre, and even the A-10 Thunderbolt II, with its massive GAU-8 cannon. Each one carries the same philosophy born in those Australian workshops, that adaptability and firepower, when combined, can change the course of war. Japanese historians, writing decades later, view the B-25 strafer as one of the 3 technologies that sealed their nation's fate, alongside radar and code breaking. Professor Masanori of the Japanese Defense University would write, "The B-25 destroyed not only our ships, but our faith in naval warfare itself. It forced Japan to fight a war we could no longer supply, and therefore could no longer win." It is a sobering acknowledgement, one that transcends national pride. Because the story of the B-25 is not just about victory or defeat, but about human imagination under pressure. The men who built it were not engineers in laboratories, but mechanics in tin sheds. The pilots were not aristocrats of war, but farm boys and factory workers who turned courage into innovation. And perhaps that is why the story still resonates. When veterans of the strafer squadrons gather decades later, they remember the smell of gun oil and the vibration of 8 machine guns firing in unison. They speak softly of friends who never came back, of missions where the sea rose to meet them, of ships that disappeared in smoke and fire. They know that what they flew was something unique, a creation born not of theory, but of necessity, of survival, of sheer will. In the end, the B-25 strafer is more than metal and engines. It is a symbol of a truth that spans every war, that the side willing to adapt, to think differently, to risk everything, will shape history. Over the Bismarck Sea, in that 15-minute storm of fire, the world saw that truth made real. And as the veterans fade into history, the echo of their engines remains, the deep, guttural roar of courage and invention intertwined. The roar of the flying gunships that changed the Pacific, and with it, the world. When I look back at the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, I don't just see a victory. I see a turning point in the human story of war. It was where innovation met desperation, and where the ingenuity of a few mechanics and pilots changed the fate of an empire. The Japanese believed the sea belonged to them, but in just 15 minutes, that illusion sank beneath the waves, undone, not by superior numbers, but by imagination, courage, and adaptation. To me, that's the true lesson of the Bismarck Sea. In every war, the greatest weapon isn't steel or firepower. It's the human mind, daring to see what others cannot. Because sometimes, history doesn't change in years. It changes in minutes, in the roar of engines over a dark and burning sea.